Hello, welcome to the session on agenda setting. Previously we've looked at actors, we've looked at policy issues, and so on. So now we are moving towards the process of agenda setting to look at how issues may begin to come alive for any policy making. What is agenda? An agenda is a list of things to be done or considered, or could be an ideological plan or program. Think about when you are called for meetings. There is always an agenda. So things to be done. In other words, so it's a collection of from a policy perspective. It's a collection of it's a collection of problems, a collection of public problems, understandings of causes or symbols or solutions or other elements of public problems. So it could be also a list of bills that are before the legislature for to be passed or to be legitimatized or to have a decision made upon them. So that is also an agenda. Could be a series of beliefs about the existence or magnitude of problems or how they should be addressed. So think about any kind of combination of things or that require a particular action or particular consideration for action. That is an agenda. So when we talk about agenda in public, we're looking at a list of things that, or a list of issues that require any intervention or action through any policy process. And there are also, as we saw in the previous, there are many public problems or concerns or issues or human rights issues that require government intervention to address them from a policy perspective in that case. This is a list of things or issues that could be discussed. Now, of course, sometimes there is required for intervention by institutions or media or public at large to look at those issues. So we have two different types of agendas. We have systemic and government agenda. The systemic agenda contains issues of public issues that the public is aware of and may be discussing. So think about a general problem that is affecting public, that the public is indeed discussing about. For instance, in Uganda's case, it could be about the recent the recent kidnaps, so kidnapping of people and then people disappearing. So the public is discussing about it. I always joke about, these days people joke about the drone issue. So the joke about the drone issue definitely is stemming from a particular public problem, which has to do with the increasing number of kidnaps of people and disappearing. So that is a systemic agenda because the public is aware and indeed it is discussing about it. So Background looks at it at systemic agenda as any idea that could possibly be considered for participants in the policy process. We also have the agenda, the government agenda, which relates to enactment or the act of putting a decision such as legislation or regulation into effect. So it could be any agenda at Parliament. What Parliament, for instance, is looking at discussing in a particular session, and therefore that makes it a government agenda. So any issues that policymakers are addressing at certain time So there are several bills that could be up for tabling in Parliament, and that makes it a government agenda. Okay, and of course, while these two are distinctive, they are not necessarily so much different from each other, because at any time a systemic agenda can turn into a government agenda, and therefore could be tabled for any, let's say, parliamentarian for a discussion in Parliament, and therefore turns out to be an issue of policy discussion. So, just for your own thoughts, what issues do you think are on the public agenda currently? So, any issues that the public is discussing and is aware of, and then what issues do you think are on the government agenda currently? So, issues that the government institutions or political institutions are concerned about and are aware of, and are indeed considering decisions upon them. So just for your own thoughts. So when we talk about an agenda or issues on the agenda, all issues on the agenda definitely stem from what we call social construction, because social construction deals with a certain reality that we create as stakeholders in policy making. So there is a particular reality or perception or view that different stakeholders have on a particular problem. Politician could be viewing a particular problem, such as, let's say, an environmental problem, as from a political perspective. The environmentalists could be looking at, let's say, plastics from environmental conservation perspective. The economists could be looking at it from the perspective of economics in terms of goods and services, or also. So there are all sorts of social constructions regarding particular issues. So social construction is a process of defining or selling it, defining a problem and selling it to society. So different problem definitions depend on goals of the proponent, a particular depiction of a problem based on a particular stakeholder or policy actor, the nature of the problem, and also the nature of political debate upon which that particular problem is being discussed. So they are containing interests and stories, of course, about a certain problem and how it is constructed in terms of discussion, or in terms of trying to make it to appear on the agenda. So of course, so social construction also is related to what we call policy issue framing. Of course, problems are the reality, but of course sometimes they are confusing, they are complex, they are multidimensional, and they are sometimes overwhelming, and therefore leading to different interpretations. And the different interpretations are the different social constructions that we're talking about, or the different realities about how people feel or perceive particular policy issues. So framing in that case would lead to what we call focusing event, or focusing the issue. The lenses through which different actors interpret particular problems would therefore help in how a particular problem is framed to make it to the agenda, and therefore be addressed from a policy perspective. So framing therefore has an influence on how on the perceived significance of the problem itself. If the problem is framed well, then that would attract more attention and therefore could make it the agenda. And of course, framing can be made by, let's say, media or elites or politicians or the public itself or interest groups. So the way the problem is framed definitely would influence or would determine the level of acceptance at the agenda setting level, and of course influences prioritization in terms of the issues on the agenda, and of course framing also influences likely set of alternative solutions that would be made for that particular problem. So social construction, you have the problem, and then there is different interpretations and social constructions, and therefore leading to confusion and complexity and multidimensional and sometimes overwhelming. So that leads to different interpretations and therefore requires particular framing or focusing of it, so that you have it hold some strength to be for it to be prioritized or for it to attract alternative solutions at agenda setting. So, what is agenda setting? Now that we know what agenda is as a list of policy issues, what is agenda setting? It could mean it is a process by which problems come to attention of the government, and again, as I said, the attention could be for a problem to get attention. It depends on how it is framed and interpreted by different actors. It's a process also by which problems and alternative solutions gain or lose public elite attention, public and elite attention, or the activities of various actors and groups that cause issues to gain greater attention in that case, or preventing them from gaining attention. So agenda setting is not just a space for accepting different policy issues also, but it's also a process within which certain issues lose attention or they are discarded from the agenda, depending on how interested the different actors are, especially the politicians or the elites that have certain leverages on control of the agenda. So you could, for instance, when you go to meetings, there is always an agenda, but then there is always a question on whether the agenda should be adopted or not, or whether some issues should be removed from the agenda for that meeting, or whether there are other issues that the meeting members should want to be addressed. And sometimes you hear the chair, so in this case the chairperson for that committee, or the person who is leading the meeting or who is chairing the meeting, has certain privilege or has certain privilege in terms of power to control what comes on the agenda or not. So the chair in that meeting could decide that, okay, no, these are too many, so we reduce. Or if a member suggests or brings about an issue that should be included on the agenda, the chair, with her influence or his influence, could decide that that is of no interest. For instance, it could be conflicting the other issues that the chair would want to address or not. So in this case, the chair, look at the chair as the government and the elite, okay, and then look at the attendees of the meeting as other actors who are trying to bring forward particular issues. So in this case, agenda setting becomes a space for eliminating or attracting attention to certain issues. So it's, in other words, a process of deciding what issues will be decided, what problems will be addressed by the government. And as you'll see here, we've moved from problem identification and we're moving towards the whole process of policy making. So in this case, we're talking about, in this session, we're covering agenda setting. Okay. So it's not an automatic process. It's not an automatic event. It involves, because it involves a level of galvanizing different interests to have to have to attract interest and influence on a particular problem, and therefore making it socially constructed process. So it's not automatic, it's a process right from the interpretation, framing, and then up to when certain issue appear on the agenda. So uh, it's a complex process. That does not necessarily mean that if the government has recognized, or if an individual has appeared in the newspaper or on TV calling for government to come and rescue or for help, does not necessarily mean that that would attract particular attention. But it involves some level of development, or depending on the magnitude of the problem and how many people are affected in that case. Okay. um, so public problems chosen and recognized by decision makers in a political system um, can qualify for agenda setting. And in that case, of course, agenda setting begins with debate over issues. The debate is always concerned about whether the issue is a problem. So about whether it needs something to be done, or whether something needs to be done about it, or whether it is a condition for which the government or other policy actors have no control over. Okay, so in this case, yes, kidnapping people is becomes an issue, a problem. An issue is the issue of a problem. But uh, things such as disasters or crisis is a condition under which the government might not have control immediately, but then after, with due process, such a condition can start now generating other problems that then the government would then focus on trying to address. Uh, so think about those conditions that the government has no much control over, but of course can use other mechanisms to look at them, not necessarily from a political perspective. Okay, so the agenda setting debate begins with the concern whether a particular raised issue is a problem that requires a policy solution, or whether it is a condition that cannot be handled at a particular time in that case. And of course, so problem definitions and solutions. So some issues or problems make it to the agenda while others do not. And even so, some policy solutions or alternatives are considered for policy while others are not. So some problems make it to the agenda because depending on different factors, including maybe the magnitude of the problem, whether the problem is whether the issue is a condition rather than a problem, a public problem, whether it is affecting a big number of people and how it is affecting them, whether there are resources to address such a problem, all sorts of different issues, or whether the media indeed is defining it accordingly. So that kind of social construction. But even so, even if the problem makes it to the agenda, then there are different alternative solutions that would be made for that particular public problem. So depending again on different alternative solutions, then the available, then the problem might be neglected or eliminated from the agenda, or considered for agenda, depending on the kind of solutions that have been presented for that case. So there are different aspects uh, for agenda setting. In other words, ways of agenda setting, and one of them is the public agenda, which is bottom up. In other words, the development or definition of the problem that needs to be addressed begins or stems from the public itself. Could be interest groups or collective groups that come up and then make the problem visible, and then the problem can be adopted for agenda. But one other way is the top down, which is the formal agenda setting, the usual government mechanism of dealing with problems. So for top down, you have the government or institutions more initiating the agenda setting for particular problems to be addressed. So in this case, the agenda could stem from institutional capacities and so on, or government concern over particular happenings within the institutions and the public. So depending on the formal agenda or the top-down agenda depends on decision makers or officials and politicians in any sector or local government in that case. So those themselves can look at it. So an example of a top-down is taxation. Taxation can be taxation policy can be as a result of a formal agenda setting. Okay. Then there is elite agenda setting, which is also top down, but this one depends on the definition and influence by the elite groups. Although it is top down, yeah, we are calling it top down because the elites are always a small group number of people that have some leverage or privileges to influence policy setting. So in that case, you can have them also influence what kind of policies could be made or not, or what kind of issues on agenda issues could be adopted. Okay, so that is also very important. Okay, so for the bottom or public agenda, it's difficult, but some public policy options arise from people's opinions, indeed. So agenda issues here are identified and influenced by individuals or groups, candidates seeking elections, or maybe think about your politicians that you are voting for. Could be from political leaders who are seeking to enhance their reputation or prospects of re-election. It could be political parties seeking to define their principles or create favorable popular images. Think about what is happening in Uganda. Apparently, could be mass media seeking to create news. Think about, for instance, what was happening in the US concerning Trump with his ideology of fake news and so on, or our local newsrooms that create particular issues and therefore rise into a particular public problem. Or it could be the poorest groups or marginalized groups deliberately seeking to call for attention to their problems. So in that case, that is how all those are ways on how public agenda can happen, or public agenda setting can happen. So issues to do with, for instance, human rights concerns or crises or disasters could attract public attention and therefore compel public officials to respond to them. Think about the Bududa issues of the landslides in Uganda also. Or think about the conflict or crisis that we have within our regions. Media reporting on issues, problems or crises could also lead to public attention. So in this case, the media has so much to do when it comes to agenda setting, because the media influences how we socially construct or interpret particular issues that affect us as the public. So the media has a big influence or big impact on whether whether items can make it agenda or not. For the formal or top-down agenda, you have the government's attention on public issues or politicians in any sector. So the government concern about public opinions or interests or problems and definitions. And of course, you also have the second aspect of top-down, which is the elite. But of course, these two formal top-down agenda could lead to what we call the policy monopoly, where you have a few dominant actors retaining control over the definition or construction of the definition of the problem, or they could also choose to suppress the policy decision making process. So even if the issue arises from the public, which is public agenda, it might not make it to it might not attract attention because some government officials or institutions or elite are acting to suppress such attention to such problems. Okay, so that is one weakness with the top-down agenda setting monopoly, policy monopoly. So you could also research about media and the impact of media or influence on media and agenda setting. So the role and influence of media in defining policy issues and general influence on agenda setting. But you could also do some further research on interest groups and agenda setting. So how the role of these interest groups and how they influence certain policy issues to get attention on the agenda. So there are particular policy models and of course ways on how describing how issues make it to the agenda or attract attention for agenda setting. So mainly, of course, we could draw our attention to Kingdon's streams metaphor. So according to Kingdon, an issue gets on political agenda setting if three streams converge. So the three streams include problem stream, the policy stream, and the politics stream. So according to Kingdon, the problem stream involves the way on how a particular problem is defined. So the question there would be: is the condition or problem is the condition considered a problem or not? If not, then in that case, policy would not be the issue will not make it to the agenda because it lacks specific definitions, or there is no low level of consensus and certainty about that particular problem, and therefore might not make it for policy. There is policy stream where the issue is of concern is developing solutions, and therefore the question there would be: are there policy alternatives that can be implemented? Policy alternatives that could be implemented, in other words, to address a particular problem, if that problem is known or defined by different actors in that case. And of course, the policy stream could also result from previous policies that have been implemented. So in that case, you could refer to the incrementalism model of policy making. Then there is the political stream, which looks at politics at work, of course, working politics in this case. And the question there would be, of course, are politicians willing and able to make a policy change? So the argument here by Kingdom is that when elements of two or three streams come together or converge, then there is a window of opportunity that is formed, and the window of opportunity could lead to issues gaining agenda status and therefore can be adopted for agenda setting, or alternative solutions being selected and therefore drawing attention for agenda setting. So of course, like I said, it's not an agenda setting is not an automatic process. It takes time. So with time, problems can be generated and socially constructed and interpreted. And if problems are constructed in that case, then they would draw attention towards agenda. But also, as a policy stream, some policies that have been implemented or some problems could draw attention to particular alternatives that are thought about on how policies can be implemented to address particular problems. But there is also a stream of politics where, for instance, politicians within institutions or government could decide on whether particular problems could be addressed or not. So you have here a problem defined, and then particular alternative policy solutions, and then you have willingness of politicians to address a particular problem. So if any of these two or three converge, then you have what we call the window of opportunity. And the window of opportunity would give way for agenda items to be adopted for discussion, and therefore to see if they can be formulated to become policy, to become a policy in that case. So a window of opportunity in this case is the point in time at which policy change becomes more likely as the various streams are joined. So you have your window of opportunity there. So here you have an intersection of policy and political stream, and when they emerge, the question is whether a particular problem is politically desirable or politically considered, and if it is technically feasible. But again, yes, the problem could be technically feasible and politically desirable, but it is difficult to convince voters about that particular problem. Then where you have the policy converging with the policy stream converging with the problem, there is technically feasible. The problem is technically feasible and possible with the voters, but then not on message with the political agenda. So yes, there could be policy alternatives. There could for a particular perceived or particular problem, but then the issue here is then the problem in that case would be convincing politicians to accept that particular problem to get it to the agenda for setting. Then you have, of course, the convergence of political and problem stream. And there, a certain issue is politically achievable and publicly popular, but then ineffective in achieving ultimate goals. So in that case, the alternative solutions are too limited to address maybe that particular problem, or could be maybe the resources are not available for politicians to spend on that particular problem, even if the problem is popular and known by others. So for Kingdon, it is better that all these streams come together, and in that case, that would create an ideal window for that particular issue to make it to the agenda, and therefore be considered for formulation and decision making, and therefore implementation as a policy. So the question is that, of course, with time something happens, a window of opportunity happens, and of course, uh, a possibility, of policy change in that case. Um, but there is no guarantee that that change might happen, because of other factors that would influence the way that issue is framed. Is framed, or the solutions are considered for that particular issue. So there is no guarantee of any policy change, even if those windows, even if the window of opportunity appears, does not necessarily guarantee possibility of policy change, because again, considering how many issues that you have on agenda, and considering the cost effectiveness and cost benefit of the different, or prioritization of different policy problems. So, but again, even if there is no guarantee, if that window happens, it could help in triggering a change in understanding that particular problem, since it has made it on agenda, therefore attracted attention of many. It could also, the window can also be, even if it does not guarantee the change, it can also be, so even if it does not guarantee policy change, it can be change in, can lead to change in political stream, favorable for political change. It could also be a window for change in understanding of controllability of that particular problem. In other words, its magnitude versus how the level of addressing it. Or it could also be a window for focusing an event, drawing more attention to that particular problem. So there are different advantages of having that particular window of opportunity, even if it does not guarantee possibility for policy change. So different actors have different aims, of course, uh, uh, on agenda setting, and the main aims are to put or fix the issues on agenda, or to eliminate issues on the agenda. So different actors have their own interests on why they participate in agenda setting. Of course, the government could, as the leverage the elites have, could participate to have the issues be fixed on agenda or be removed on agenda. The public or interest groups or think tanks or any other could participate in terms of removing or fixing particular issues on agenda. So groups, political power, and agenda setting in that case is becomes a complex process that different actors act on power or influence and interest to regarding a particular issue. And of course, groups use power to influence agenda items, and therefore advancing the alternative ways, the alternative social constructions of a problem. So to have particular problems of their interest be adopted for agenda, and therefore made into policies. So, but of course, for the definition of the alternatives is the supreme instrument of power. So in that case, the social construction of problems and how alternatives are framed and presented definitely is a measure of instrument is a measure of instrument of power that particular groups of actors would use that leverage to use their power to influence particular definitions of solutions or problems for policy making. And of course, the tactics of agenda setting involve creating an issue, dramatizing it, calling for attention to it, and then pressure the government to do something about it. And that's how policy making is. So when a particular issue makes it to agenda, particular interest groups must create it, define it in a way that it has to attract attention, and therefore put pressure on government institutions or politicians to do something about it, and therefore in that case formulating it into a public policy. And of course the tactics are these tactics are employed by agenda setting actors, which include influential individuals, organized interest groups, or policy planning organizations. Could be policy planning organization on environment, for instance, if it's an environmental issue. Political candidates, office holders, it could be the politicians or ministers in that case, or it could be mass media, and which is of course most important in terms of creating attention or dramatizing particular issues regarding what is happening and how the government should act upon it. Okay, so for instance, in the previous years in Uganda, we had a moment where many women were being killed around, I think, central region, and therefore, and that itself had, of course, the media played a big role on finding such an issue, dramatizing it, and then called attention to it, and then the public joined the media to put pressure on the government to do something about it. So of course you had also the president say that issue was dealt with because they knew what was happening. So in that case, if the media never did something about it or created such attention, perhaps more killings would be happening that the government wouldn't be aware of, or the public would not get that pulled that particular pressure on the government to do something about it. So the question there is then, does agenda matter? And of course the answer is yes, because yeah, it matters, yeah, because we have many issues, but we have limited there is limited space, and therefore there is competition of different items or issues or problems, and therefore that competition would lead to prioritization of particular alternative solutions or problems that have been identified. And yeah, it matters because there are different frames of issues, but again, limited agenda space. It matters because there are different alternatives, but again, limited space and resources. So agenda is very important for discussion, depending on different factors, including resources, including space, including prioritization, including the interests and influence of others, including the impact that a particular problem has. Yes, agenda is important because different groups of actors push for or promote issues of their interests, and others try to put off the issues from the agenda. Agenda matters because getting issues on agenda influences policy decisions that could be adopted and in that case it would be a win. But also, of course, alternative on the other hand, it could be a loss if such issues are put off the agenda. Agenda matters because there is drawing of attention for some issues, and therefore focusing such events to put pressure on government, depending on how such issues have been defined by different actors. And again, groups prepare for time. Agenda is very important because groups prepare for the time when particular crises make their issue more likely to occupy a more prominent space on the agenda. So these are some of the issues why agenda setting matters. So you have a discussion question regarding why do some issues make it agenda, and and although agenda setting or through agenda setting, and why others do not make it. So you can sit and reflect on particular issues. So think about human rights concerns or any other issues that are placing the public, and then look at how why some of them would make it to agenda and while others wouldn't make it, to attract the government's attention to come to the rescue. Issues get to the agenda, then how do they do so? So depends on the indicators or the magnitude of the problem. The changes in the issues or indicators, whether positive or negative, would lead to increased attention by the responsible actors. For instance, data on crime could indeed show that there is a high that crime is becoming a big problem, and therefore requires government attention to work on it. Or data on domestic violence or gender-based violence could also indicate that the problem is becoming and therefore requires government attention. Could also make it to agenda because of the causal stories, the narratives of public problem and its causes. So what is the public talking about a certain problem? Such narratives or interpretations or meanings or stories regarding a particular problem, about a problem and its cause and its effects, could also lead to issues getting to the agenda. There's also what we call venue shopping, whereby interest groups find best settings to press their claims. For instance, such as interest groups going to parliament to testify regarding what is happening in their communities or in certain areas, and that venue shopping can also lead to issues getting on agenda setting. There's also the way the problems are framed, or in other words, focusing events, or could also lead to whether the problem makes it on agenda or not. So, for instance, the focusing of the event could be on how harmful the event is, or who is affected, what groups or communities are affected, or who knows about it. So simultaneous knowing by mass and the elite actors could as well create a window of opportunity for attracting attention to that particular problem. So these here you have some types of causal theories with examples. For instance, here you could have unguided action that are resulting from people brainstorming about a particular issue, or you have purposeful action, for instance, that do with maybe the problem is the programs that work as intended but cause harm could also result into issues, or could also result into problems that could be considered for policy making. Or you have unintended consequences which are accidental. Them could be caused by weather or earthquake or anything, and that could lead to problems that could attract attention, and therefore leading to such problems making it to agenda. Or could be unforeseen sides of or avoidable ignorance, or carelessness or omission that lead to particular problems, and therefore creating more effects that would lead to the government being put under pressure to create solution for that particular problem. So all those are different types of causal stories or narratives that would lead to particular problems which could attract the attention on agenda setting. But so the bottom line is that will all issues be considered for agenda? Yes and no, depending on what we've just discussed. So, but again, having an issue make it to the agenda, to the formal agenda, does not guarantee that a decision would be made in its favor. So, again, that's what we were talking about when we talked about the about Kingdon's window of opportunity. That creating a window of opportunity and therefore creating an opportunity for an issue to make it to the agenda does not guarantee any policy change. So it's the same as what we're talking about here, that it does not, while others don't make it to the agenda, while some issues make it agenda, others don't make it to the agenda or through the agenda process. But again, it does not guarantee that the issues that make it to the agenda will all be considered for policy making. Okay. So decision makers, which are mostly legislators and executives, would give official attention to a few issues depending on different factors, including maybe resources or the alternative benefits and alternative solutions that are available, and who is to act upon it. All those factors, or the regions that are affected, or the number of people that are affected. So depending on that, such factors would definitely define the level of attention that decision makers would put on a particular issue. And so a policy would be formulated basing on the few issues decided on the agenda, and therefore that makes us move to policy formulation. But of course, before that, we can take a more look at policy analysis, because formulation would depend on how particular issues and alternatives have been analyzed regarding different, of course, considering different factors. So this will be discussed in the next session. So you have here your resources, reading resources that could help you to get more understanding regarding agenda setting. And thank you.